What an incredible introduction. Well, thank you very much. That was very generous. I am delighted to be here. I'm so honored to be here. I was fortunate to be a part of the Clinton team back at the Department of Education in the 90s. So it's really exciting for me to come here, and really an honor for me to come here to have a conversation. I'll talk for a little while, but I really want you all to be writing down some questions and thinking about early childhood education and what we can do to advance this in our country. I'd like to thank Kiana and Kate for having lunch with me, and Nikolai for what you do around these wonderful luncheon speakers, and Dean Rutherford for the leadership here. I think there's no better use of somebody's time than public service. And that's certainly something that was instilled in me when I was a young child, in my husband, and we've done the same with our daughters, one whom is a doctor and runs a nonprofit clinic for the uninsured, and the other who actually trains pre-K teachers. So it's a delight to be here. I'm also really feel like we wouldn't be here if it weren't for the Clintons. Not only for this amazing school, but to be talking about early childhood education, because what the vision they had and the foundation they laid in this state and then took to Washington and now have taken across the country and even globally has really given us something that no other president has done. So hats off to the Clintons. So I have three things to do. One is I want to talk about why are we here? Why are we talking about early childhood education? What's all the hype about? Then I want to talk a little bit about, based on the hype, what is in place right now in states, what's working, what's not. And then I want to talk about the President's proposal, because I think it is an opportunity that you need to know about, we all need to know about, we need to be thinking about, and hopefully acting on. So what's all the hype about 0 to 5? What's so special about those early years? Why are people paying attention as they never have before? And I think it's one simple answer. It's the research. And I think the research has driven us from a point where we said, oh, early childhood education, that would be nice. It's something that would be nice. I went to pre-K, it was very nice. But now we know, because of the research, it is imperative. It's critical. And if we don't do it, we are taking our own future ruining, really taking a big back step in our own future, because this is the foundation for not only education, but for a person's lifelong career. So there are a couple of studies. I want to talk about some early studies that provide some background on this. And I want to talk about the brain research, because that really is new in the past decade or two, and kind of where that has led us. So there were two studies, and these are longitudinal studies. So they're not just studies that were done and we say, oh, we think this is happening, but these are studies that were done. The first one I want to talk about is the Perry Preschool Project. And it was started in 1962. So they took 3 and 4-year-old children who actually had lower IQs from very poor families, disadvantaged kids. They provided them an intensive curriculum with a highly qualified teacher, and then they also worked really closely with the parents. So they did that when the children were 3 and when they were 4. And this project then has followed these kids for 4 decades. So we've been able to see what happened to the children that were in the control group who didn't get this high quality program, and what happened to the children that were in this high quality program, and what were the differences. And they were pretty incredible. What it did show is that the IQ, which is kind of what we always used to look at, kind of faded. It didn't make a difference. But the achievement, what those children did in school, did make a difference. And there were particularly differences around motivation and kind of the character development. The children were more likely to finish school. They were less likely to end up in special education. They were less likely to be held back. they were less likely to get involved with the criminal justice system. So those savings now have been calculated by economists and show that for every dollar we spent, we get back $6 to $10. So that's one study. People say, oh, that's just one study. It was done a long time ago. But it was a randomized control trial, and what's amazing is it's been longitudinal. It's not just looking at 3 or 4 years. There's another one. This was in Carolina, the Abecedarian Project. This study was a little bit more intense. It took kids when they were born and worked really closely with the parents, because we all know that parents want to do the best job they can, but they don't always know what to do. So it provided really good parenting skills. But it also took those babies and put them in a high-quality setting for when they're babies, first 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, for 5 years. They tested them, they assessed them, because they weren't just looking at IQ, as I said, at ages 12, 15, 21, and 30. And once again, they found these lifelong, lasting effects. In terms of the parenting, the parents got engaged. They did a better job raising their children. They were more attached to them, and we know that that can actually help a child significantly. So we have those 2 studies. There are a number of other ones, and then there are more recent studies looking at programs in Oklahoma. There's a wonderful program in Boston. They've done assessments of those pre-K programs and found effects, for 2 or 3 years, but they're not longitudinal, so they haven't found those lifelong effects. But I think based on those studies, researchers and economists have really determined that these early years are particularly important for laying the foundation for a child's success in school as well as success in life. Also, I want to mention that the Abecedarian study found incredible health outcomes. So you don't expect that, right? You're thinking about development, you're thinking about the brain and learning, but they found that when they looked at the control group as compared with the children that got the treatment, as adults, they had lower blood pressure, they had lower abdominal obesity, less hypertension, and less heart disease. So from a cognitive-oriented program early on, where you're looking at the whole child, you have later health outcomes that are significant. So we know that from these studies. More recently, we have something called MEG. It's a magnetic encephalography. Do you all know how to say that? It's MEG machine. Essentially, what they do is they put those little things on the baby's brain, and then they look at the brain and provide different stimulus, or they look at the brain before and then they provide some sort of intervention and look at the brain afterwards. So this is really looking at the changes in the brain, and this is happening in iLabs up in Seattle. iLabs stands for Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences. They're doing amazing work. And what they have shown is that early stimulation has incredible effects on the child's brain. Based on that, it's not what children are born with. It's what we do with what they're born with. It's all about opportunity. And so that's why those early years are important, because it's not that children are damned because they're born in a poor family. The problem is, if we don't give them the opportunity, then they won't have the kinds of lives that we all want them to have. There's another center that I want you to know about. It's at Harvard. It's called the Center on the Developing Child. And they're doing a lot of research around early brain development as well. And they're showing that stress in a child's life, whether it's the stress the child is having or just being in a stressful family where they're hearing mother and father who don't get along, or they're in a neighborhood where there's a lot of stress, actually has very negative effects on the child's brain. They're also doing a lot of new research around something called executive functioning. And executive functioning, James Heckman, who's a Nobel laureate, has recently kind of taken the word executive functioning. He's calling it more like character. But whatever you call it, whether it's executive functioning or it's character, what we're looking at is those kind of soft skills about motivation, perseverance, resilience. You know, how do you get along with others? The kinds of skills that employers are looking at, those are some of the skills, many of the skills that are developed early in a child's life. So based on the research around brain development, where we're actually seeing the brain and the changes, and then these longitudinal research studies, it's driven us to looking at, you know, what is the role of parents and how can we strengthen that role? And then what can we be doing in schools and settings to help strengthen those? Because we know, you know, moms are working, dads are working, children are in childcare, and in most cases, we're not getting what we need out of those childcare systems. Because we've said, oh, it's just, you know, we're just going to keep these kids busy while their parents work instead of this is a learning environment. So it really, the hype is all about research, and it's well done research. It's indisputable research. You may have someone criticize and say, oh, I've heard about this study or that study, but the preponderance of the evidence is clearly on the side of these years are critical for making a difference in children's lives. So based on that, we have a lot happening. There's some stuff happening at the federal level, there's a lot happening at the state level, even probably more, and then even stuff happening at the local level. So and some of this is actually also reflected in public opinion. So recently, the First 5 Years Fund, which has done a wonderful job advocating on the federal level, did a poll, and they said 68% of voters think that only half of our children, or fewer of our children, enter kindergarten with the skills they need to succeed. So people are getting it, you know, that our kids aren't ready when they get to, when they're ready, when it's time to enter kindergarten, these kids aren't ready. And then the same poll said that 89% say it's important to make early childhood education more affordable and more equitable, and that the federal government should do more. So what's happening? Nationally, we have Head Start, and you hear, you know, you have great people say Head Start's fantastic, Head Start's not so great. I think Head Start is fantastic, but there's some programs that need to improve. Some of our very best programs are in Head Start, but we also have some that don't live up to the vision of what we want. And so the federal government has looked at this. HHS has now recompeted the programs that are at the bottom, and they're working really hard to ensure improvement. They're setting higher standards. Standards aren't enough. You got to see that the change occurs in the teacher-child interaction, and they're using a particularly strong instrument to make sure that that happens as well. We have child care. We have spent a lot of money in this country on child care. We have a great leader at HHS, Linda Smith, who's leading our country through major changes around child care. Without even further legislation, they're strengthening the requirements now. So there's a little bit of controversy going on around that, because people who run child care centers, some of them really want to do a better job, and some are saying, oh, I can't afford it, you know, we can't change. But it's critical that we start using every child care setting as a learning setting. We need to transform that. So the child care bill is being marked up, which means, as you all probably know, heard and written and amended now at the federal level. And I think we will see that though some of those changes occur, probably not as fast as I would like, but I think we will see significant steps forward over the next couple of years. One of the most exciting things over the last 5 years has been a focus on parenting, that children enter pre-K behind, and that we need to do much more in those first 3 years. So we have this program called Maternal Infant Early Childhood Home Visiting. I nicknamed it McV. Some people in this state call it Michva, but I prefer McV. But it is a pretty exciting program. It's $1.5 billion spread over 5 years, and each state was given the opportunity to apply for some of this funding. And then some of it has come down in formula to every state, and then states that wanted to do more were able to apply for more. Unfortunately, Arkansas applied for more. Essentially, if you don't know what home visiting is and you're thinking, what's Libby talking about early childhood education? That sounds like, you know, you're working on Meals for Wheels, or, I mean, Meals on Wheels, or the elderly. Home visiting is for infants and toddlers. And you provide, what the programs do is provide a trained professional as a mentor or a coach for an expectant mom or a new mom. And you help that family. Hopefully it's a mother and a father, but if it's just a mother or just a father, that will do that as well. Give them the skills and the support that they need to be the best parent they can be. Help them be responsible. Help them learn what they didn't learn that so many of us were fortunate to learn when we were born or when we were young, that our parents just taught us naturally. So the research around home visiting is just as strong as that around pre-K, which is that these kids enter school more prepared, they do better, they're more likely to graduate and go on to have fulfilling lives. It also is a two-generation program, so it impacts that mother as well. And the research shows that the mother is more likely to go back to school, get off welfare, and become a, you know, high-functioning member of our society and a better parent for not only that child, but for the children that come behind. So we are fortunate to have Head Start, child care, and home visiting going on at the federal level, helping support what's going on at the states. In terms of state growth around early childhood, it has really led the way. And when I talk about the President's proposal, it wouldn't be there if it weren't for states really coming in and making this happen. I was fortunate to lead a program called Pre-K Now, which our goal was to get pre-K for every 3- and 4-year-old in the country. We didn't totally succeed, but we did double the number of children and double the amount of funding in 10 years. The Pew Charitable Trust put $100 million behind that effort, and we worked in over 30 states to do that. So the enrollment now is about 28% in state-funded pre-K. The funding is about 1.3, we fund about 1.3 million children in 2012. That's 3- and 4-year-olds, 1.1 million 4-year-olds. And with Head Start, that jumps up to about 41% of our 4-year-olds. So 41% of our 4-year-olds are in state-funded pre-K or Head Start. That's pretty significant. That growth has been phenomenal over the last decade. And I think that programs like you have here in Arkansas, people will say in schools, we could not get rid of them. When business leaders around the country, particularly in Illinois or in New York, ask me, Libby, you know, where can we see some good pre-K? You know where I tell them? Oklahoma. Oklahoma has pre-K for every 4-year-old. Every single 4-year-old in Oklahoma is able to walk in to a pre-K program in September at age 4 and get a high-quality program. Georgia, another state that offers pre-K for every 4-year-old. Arkansas is not doing bad, though. You have pre-K for most of your children, 4-year-old children, at 200% of poverty, and many of your 3-year-olds. So Arkansas has been really, really smart about offering pre-K for 3s and 4s. And the other thing Arkansas has done well is they've concentrated on quality. Because we all know that if the program is not a quality program, you really won't have those outcomes that I talked about. Because those 2 studies I told you about, the Abecedarian and the Perry Preschool program, those were high quality programs. Those were programs where kids got intensive services, where the teachers were well trained, where they got that back and forth, that interaction that we know is so important, where children were playing and acting upon their environment instead of just being little automatons and doing what they were told. So we see that in Arkansas you've done a lot of the right stuff, which is provide for 3s, provide for 4s. I didn't talk a little about your home visiting program, but also you have an extensive home visiting program using a variety of different models to meet different parents' needs. It serves every county in this state, and you invest some of your state money in addition to some of the new federal money that's coming down. Before I go on to the President's proposal, I want to tell you, also, we see some great things happening at the local level. I want to talk about one in particular because, as Kiana mentioned, I'm from Texas. And so in San Antonio, which is right near my home city of Austin, the city passed, let's see, an eighth of a cent sales tax. And that is now funding pre-K for all their at-risk 4-year-olds. So every at-risk 4-year-old, they have some state funding to put in, but in San Antonio is able to go to pre-K. And they've built 2 brand new centers, and they're about to build 2 more large centers. We see a number of other cities. I've heard mentioned that Memphis is looking at the same thing. I know there was just saw a newspaper article that Fort Worth is looking at the same thing. So cities and states aren't waiting for the federal government to act because the research is so clear that we need to do something, and we need to do it now. The one other thing I want to talk about before I talk about the President's proposal is we do have one other brand new federal initiative. It will now come under my jurisdiction. Actually, I am in charge of it now. It's called the Early Learning Challenge Fund Race to the Top. And for those of you, you may know that Race to the Top has kind of been the way that Arnie Duncan, my new boss, has tried to reform education. And so we brought that idea of racing to the top to early learning to help states reform and improve their early childhood systems. So we now have 14 states that are receiving funding, and it's to help bring this system together because, you know, I was talking about we have Head Start, we have child care, we have state pre-K, and we have home visiting. How do you bring this together into a system? You know, how do parents find the services they need? How do we know which parents should go where? There's a lot of work to be done around building this into a cohesive system. You know, we know what a school system looks like. We know who's accountable. There's a school board, there's a superintendent, but this early childhood system is not yet formed. So this Early Learning Challenge Fund is now out there for states to use. It's a competitive grant to build this system. We have one more competition, and I've heard a rumor since I've been here that Arkansas is looking at applying, and I think you're on the cusp of certainly building this system. I think you're actually far ahead of some of the states that even have this money. So I'm very hopeful that this will happen. So, based on all that's happening, I think we got the attention of the President. I was fortunate to be there in February when he was giving his State of the Union address. I was sitting next to the teacher that had been brought in from Oklahoma. I'd heard rumors that there was going to be an announcement around early childhood. I was doing home visiting at the time, so I was like, I want pre-K because I'd done pre-K, but I'm hoping they say something about home visiting too. And I couldn't have been more excited because the President did come up with a bold proposal. This is a proposal that won't just be a little bit of incremental change. It won't be just tinkering around the edges. But this proposal will launch this country into the #1 position in terms of providing high-quality early education for our at-risk children. And that needs to happen if we're going to equalize our education, if we're going to improve our educational system, if we're going to ensure that every child can take advantage of the American dream. I think if you look at the statistics, and there's some on the education website, it really will show how American competitiveness has fallen over the last few years. We're farther behind in terms of school completion and in terms of children going, or students going on to college. And some of that can be traced back to early education. So the President's proposal has 4 different pieces. The first one is to expand evidence-based home visiting. So it's $15 billion over 10 years that would significantly increase the number of families that could be served. So I know a number of our home visiting visitors are here. We will be able to see their good work extended to every family so that any mom who needs the help to be a better parent could have that. We also have an early Head Start child care collaboration in here, because I think what we've learned is that child care, particularly for infants and toddlers, is really poor quality, and the economics of it just will not work. So we have early Head Start and child care coming together into a partnership that would significantly increase the quality of those infant, toddler classrooms and bring two programs together which we think would better support families and better support children's development. Then the biggest piece of all will be over at the Department of Education. I get to work on this, is the Preschool for All proposal. And this would be $75 billion over 10 years in mandatory funding. And it would be provided to every state that wanted it. And it wouldn't be a federal program. People keep saying, well, we don't need another federal program. This is money that would come to the states to help the states do what they're already doing so well. But it would have some requirements, because we want accountability, and we know that poor quality or even mediocre quality programs won't have the results we want. So there will be standards around what the state would have to do in terms of having learning standards, having standards for teachers, having BA degrees, having data systems that will show us if we're getting what we want. We need to be able to look back and say, did we really prevent some special education? Were these children really able to not have to be held back? I want to know that. And if not, let's figure out how we can change it. So there's certain requirements for the state, and then there were certain requirements for programs. Programs are going to have student ratios. In Texas, we allow 22, 24 children in a classroom with 4-year-olds in a classroom with one teacher. Do you think you can have a creative conversation with a child? Do you think you can do creative things, or are you going to do more rote learning? So you'll have to have no more than 20 children in a classroom with one teacher and an aide, so you really can have that interaction, because it's that give and take. We call it the serve and return. And it's the serve and return between grandparents and kids, parents and kids, and teachers and kids that really make children grow. So this would be money that would be pulled down by states that want to meet those standards. They can increase their standards. And then we have a little pot of money set aside for states, because there's still 10 states that haven't gotten the religion over early childhood education. And they're probably the ones you think. Mississippi has no state pre-K. Indiana has no state pre-K. Until recently, Hawaii didn't, but they got a governor who decided he thought that would be a good start. Alaska hasn't had a pre-K program until they just started a new one. North and South Dakota don't have pre-K. So there are a number of states around the country that haven't even started on this journey, and this would be a pot of money that they could pull down to get started. So there's a lot happening. Obviously, trying to get a large piece of legislation through a dysfunctional Congress is a challenge, but there is excitement around this. As I've been on the job for a month, I've been out in a couple of states already. I got to go on the Secretary Duncan's bus tour over in western part of our country, and there is excitement because people see the vision. They really realize that this could make education so much better. It could make families stronger, and it could really start equalizing the poverty and the disproportion we have created in this country. So I'm eager to hear what you have to think. What questions do you have? I think we have a few minutes left. Nikolai?
Yeah, we have time for some
Great.
questions.
Because we want a conversation.
All right. Raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. Here you go, Brad.
Hi, my name is Brad Cameron. I'm class 9 here at the Clinton School. And in a previous life, I was a preschool teacher in St. Louis, Missouri. And after that experience, I definitely saw the need for accountability and higher standards. I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit more about what that would look like in increasing that accountability, and how on the federal level they would ensure that that money is being well spent.
That's really a great question. I'm all about accountability. We were fortunate to pass a bill about accountability and home visiting this last session here in your state, or here in your adopted state. It's really important that we have accountability. And as we know now, there are two kinds of standards we need. We need we need standards in terms of what standards the program should meet, but we know those are not sufficient. And what you also need are process standards. It is very new in this country to be looking at that, but there are some incredible instruments out there. There's one called the class, and you're able to go in and videotape. You were able to assess. Did you participate in the class? You've observed using class. Well, I'll be anxious to hear what you think in a minute, but let's inform everybody what it's about. So you can watch a teacher interact with a child, and it's a 7-point scale, and really good classrooms are 5 and above. Unfortunately, a lot of classrooms are around 3 or 4, because what we're finding is there's good emotional support in classrooms, but there's not good instructional support. So children aren't being quite challenged quite as much as they need to be in our classrooms. But I think looking in that process, and the class is one of the best instruments. I think it's the most widely used, but I've heard there are a couple more following behind. We know from the research that it is the coaching and the mentoring of the teachers. It's not a one-off session where professional development session that's going to make the difference. It is that ongoing mentoring and coaching that is having good results. So it's going to be up to the states to figure out how they're going to be accountable. They're obviously going to have to monitor these programs. What they're going to use will be up to the state. But then there has to be a data system in place. We've got to get this figured out. Surely in this country, with the computer scientists we have, we can figure out how to get the data on early childhood education, link it to K-12, and be able to track and see, are these kids at age, when they go to 3rd grade, are they able to pass the tests? And I think that's where we're headed. So it'll be, up to the state, but it will also be, the state will have to show us in terms of the data accountability system. Any response? Did the class work when you've seen it?
So I had the benefit in undergraduate to be working with a guy named Dr. John Murphy, who that was his area of interest, his area of research, and he'd worked with Robert C. Pianta, who developed class.
Right.
And of course, Pianta focused on the upper levels, but it's been brought down to early childhood level. So knowing what it was looking for, I was before going through that evaluation process, it was really helpful as a teacher to be mindful of that. But with my experience, I felt kind of in the minority in being aware of what it was looking for and what it was about. And I, as I said, St. Louis Public Schools, it's a whole thing. But yeah, that's the professional development and the ongoing support and mentoring is really crucial, and that obviously needs to be a part of whatever money is being provided. That needs to be a major component.
Thank you. Thank you for asking the first question, because sometimes that's hard.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Jennifer Hune. I am from the University of Arkansas, Little Rock. I'm coming from the perspective of higher education. And one of the questions that I did kind of jot down, if I heard you correctly, was that there will be some monies that will come to states in order to raise the standards for teacher preparation. Will part of that funding be available to or for the state to provide some support to higher education in order to raise the standards of what we're doing for training in pre-K? If no one has told you, we are in the throes of revising all of our training, all of our licensures, and BK is one of the areas that we're going to have to train in. So I'm excited to hear that there may be a little funding coming that will support what we're needing to do on the front end. And then secondarily to that, will there be some kind of notice in terms of what perspective we're going to take. Are we going to be all DAP? Will we be coming from creative curriculum? So, you know, if that's not going to be driven, I know that all of us have the capacity to identify developing the appropriate kinds of programming. But I'm more interested in if the states will be able to use those dollars for training for pre-service teachers.
That's a really good question, and thank you for training our teachers. There are a number of things I want to say. One is, I don't want to make any promises, because this is just an idea, it's a proposal, and it won't happen unless we get active and really get the word out. I think it will be designed in such a way that the state will decide how they want to spend their dollars, and whether they want to spend some of it on higher education. I think that's all up in the air. Certainly, we know that higher education's got to do a better job. I mean, we've got to assure that the teachers that are coming out are effective. And I think that's a whole new, it's really a new frontier. I just want to say, you didn't mention this, but my pet peeve, and since I have an audience here, is some of the lack of collaboration between community colleges and colleges. And this isn't just in Arkansas, but this is all over the country, where you have someone who comes and they want to work with young children. They go get a 2-year degree at the community college. They're really interested in young children, so they take a whole lot of child development classes. They go in, they teach for 5 years. They say, you know what, I want to go to college. They go to the college, and the college looks at that transcript and says, oh, we won't accept those credits, or we'll only take half of your credits, or a third of your credits, or 2/3 of your credits. So our tax money that maybe supported that person to go through their 2-year degree, is some of it's getting wasted, that person's time, because the state hasn't figured out, and the community colleges and colleges haven't figured out how to make these two systems work together. And you all have got to do it. And some states, New Mexico has figured it out. And they don't have to waste people's time. And you know, we want to look at college completion rates. Well, we should look at that, because would you be a little discouraged if you had a 2-year degree and you want to go get 2 more years and you find out it's not 2 more years you need, it's 3 more years? No wonder people get discouraged. So I hope some of that money will go to help figure that out, and it won't take another 20 years, because we've been talking about this for 20 years. At least we have in Texas. Then one other thought is, your state is developing an Early Learning Challenge Fund application. There is they have to talk about workforce development. So you should be talking to the people that are developing that application and see, is there some room for you all to have do some work around this. Great.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Jody Mahoney.
Yeah, just hold it. Thanks.
Thank you very much for coming and sharing with us today.
Thank you.
I was curious, is there set curriculum for these programs? I was wondering how we could find those out. So,
I should ask an Arkansas person, is there a curriculum for your ABC program? Are there choices that the state, is there one, or are there a number? There are choices. So generally what states have done is they'll say, here are 4 or 5 curriculum that we are willing to spend our state dollars on. You can select which one works best for your program, for your students. Because we know one size does not fit all, and teachers like to use different curriculum. I mean, it really is important to have a good, strong curriculum. And teachers that say they don't need a curriculum, maybe if they're a master teacher and they know more than the curriculum writers, yes, but if they're a new teacher, they need a curriculum, because you have to build on the learning, and there's certain words children absolutely have to learn, and teaching children vocabulary is the hardest thing of all, and that's where our low-income children fall down the most, is in that vocabulary development, because you can learn to the letter sounds and to sound out the word elephant. That's a hard word. You could learn to sound it out. Any of us could teach a child to do that. But if they don't know what an elephant is, it's meaningless. We could all go read an engineering textbook, but it would be meaningless to us because we wouldn't have the background knowledge to bring to it. So it's so important to do that. So most states have limited, limit the curriculum, and then the state has to come in and teach the teachers how to use it. And then how does it work with our standards? Because there's certain things kids need to know when they come out of pre-K, and we got to make sure they have them all. And that's got to comport with what we expect of K-12. Because if the children don't have it going in, they're going to fail. So good question.
Yes.
I can say that in Arkansas, there's been several evaluations of the state-funded early childcare, and they can pass the test. There have been multiple evaluations, and we have linked to some degree the early childhood data with school data, and what we find is children who've been to the Arkansas Better Chance programs that are funded by the state do better than children who haven't, and there's multiple evaluations up until age 3 that happens. My question, though, is about, I'm worried about the early years, and I would like you to talk just a little bit more about how to expand the early Head Start and those kinds of levels, because what we know is 4 is absolutely, but we really need to start earlier. The brain is developing up birth to 3 primarily, and if we don't start till 4, it's too late.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we know those first 3 years. My best credentials are that I have a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, and an 8-year-old granddaughters. And so every weekend when I go home to Texas, I get a dose of what incredible learning these kids are doing. It's just totally amazing. And 3 is almost too late. So over here we have Kathy Price, and you all hopefully know Scott Gordon, who's leaving right now, who have a home visiting, Arkansas Home Visiting Network that is really providing that home visiting foundation. We can't just have these programs out there. We've got to pull them together into a system, and then we have a number of home visitors here. How many of you all do home visiting? Okay, so you have some experts right here. That's one piece. You can go, Scott. Thank you. The other piece is we've got to improve child care. And I have a feeling that your child care standards aren't much better than those in Texas. But if you allow 4 infants with one teacher who only has a GED and maybe a day of training, you're headed to disaster. And we have very low standards in Texas. And it's just, we're just not going to get where we need to go. And it's a lot of child care is paid for through our taxpayer dollars. I think the taxpayers don't realize we're buying crummy quality for our kids. And so we need to go, you need to go in and look at your child care standards and figure out what you can do to improve those. In terms of early Head Start's interesting because it's competitive. And it was when there was a lot of stimulus funds. I was very impressed because California came in and they got a lot of people there to work with the programs to apply for some of the funding. So when the funding came down, California got a lot more than their fair share because they really went in and did that. And so anytime there's a chance to get early Head Start funding, it doesn't necessarily go through formula. So it can go where there are good programs, and you could do some work in this state to assure that early Head Start funds, more than your fair share, came here. And then I think, cities like this is an amazing city. I hadn't been here for a while, and I hadn't been here since the library opened, but seeing the development and the vibrancy here, you all should start looking at, what are we doing for our kids here in our city? Because this is a city, you don't have to wait for the state, you don't have to wait for the federal government, just like San Antonio came in. And I know you will see differences. I think you can see your rankings in education have gone up because you've had a series of governors and other legislative leaders and probably really good school board members and others who put money into schools and to early childhood, and it's making a difference. So, I wouldn't wait around. There's lots you can do just without, with a lot of money and with a lot of effort, but you don't have to wait for the feds. Yes. Oops. Nikolai.
Hi, I'm Zach Paulette, and my question is around how we make all this happen.
Okay.
I work with national grassroots advocacy organization whose board recently decided to make early childhood ed a priority. So, I mean, Congress, it's hard to get money out of them, so what do you and the president need to make all this happen?
I didn't plant the question, but it's a perfect one, right? Well, you know, this has got to happen from the grassroots. And I can't imagine a worse time, because I've never seen a more dysfunctional Congress, and I've been in Washington for almost 20 years, than this one. But, you know, I do believe in the power of the people. And, you know, you all have the power here. You got to make sure every single elected official has gone to a good program. And I still tell the story about Senator Argue. He was one of your esteemed senators, and he helped us so much with the ABC program. And he tells me it took him 5 invitations before he finally went and visited the program. But he went to visit the program, he sat down in the little chair, the children came up and they touched his suit. You know, the program was really smart. They had the parents there talking about what a difference that program had made for their children. The teachers were prepped and knew what to say. Senator Argue became an advocate. He went back to the Senate, and a couple of weeks later, a page came in and said brought him a note and said he had some visitors, and he thought, you know, I'm not expecting anybody. He went out, there's the class. They'd brought him pictures. They wanted a picture taken with him. So he became an advocate. And I know you have term limits, and that makes it really challenging. I've noticed that. In states that have term limits, you have a challenge, but we got to go with who's there, and we got to assume that everybody wants to make this state, this city, this country as strong as possible. And we got to show them the research, and the research is pretty indisputable. I mean, it used to be, you know, it wasn't quite there, but it is there. And why is it so many southern states and so many poor states have poured money in? Why is it that we have Republican and Democratic governors putting more money into early childhood education? It's because it works. So get people in to see these programs. Let's get more people. Let's get James Heckman down here, and Art Rolnick, and Jack Schoenkoff, and some more people here at the Clinton School who can talk about the brain science and the research. Because I do think when people see that brain science and you see the child's brain and the difference, I mean, it is truly, if you see the pictures of it, it is just amazing. So, you know, let people know about the science. Don't give up on anybody, because we really do have to move this as a bipartisan issue, because these children are too important. Nikolai, how are we doing?
We have time for one more.
One more?
No? You want it?
Sure.
2 more.
1 second.
Can you use that so everybody can hear?
Yes. Can you hear now? No?
Keep talking.
Keep talking?
Yep.
Okay. I'm Terry Shaw, and I'm the school liaison officer at the Little Rock Air Force Base. So do you see anything coming down with regard to military and education, DOE, joining together to do anything with regard to what you're referring to for military children?
I wish I had a better answer, Terry. The truth is, I don't know. I do know a couple of things. Linda Smith, who I mentioned, is such a great leader over at HHS. She and I are determined that we're going to make sure that HHS and Department of Ed work this closely together in terms going forward, because we want to make sure that every child, no matter whether they're military, in child care, Head Start, or pre-K, get a high-quality education. You know, the military has been on the cutting edge. You all have had quality pre-K for your families for a long time, because the military realized that if they were going to have their families out there on the front, they needed to take care of the family that was left behind, and they wanted to make sure those children were getting a good education. So they have had high quality for a long time, and Linda Smith put that in place. We were able in Texas to get military children included in the pre-K, making the case that military children are at risk also, because they may have a family overseas that's stressful. They have a family member who's deployed. There is stress in those families. They move around, and that's stressful. So I would say, I'd be hopeful, but you all do have some advantages that we'd like to make sure that all children have. One more, Kate.
Katie Grenier, Class 9. My question for you, I guess, is around program quality. I know the state, especially Arkansas, is doing a really good job of looking at standards for out-of-school time programming. And so I think we're dedicated to those things. I wonder if others would agree with me, but 1 to 20 in a 4-year-old classroom seems a little undoable if we're talking about a creative space for children. So who's making those choices, and is it on a state level, and who's a part of that decision-making process? Because I think so often, especially in American government, we get so far, but we don't go all the way to make it a real quality program. And 1 to 24-year-olds just seems like a lot.
1 to 24 in Texas is ridiculous, and that's the kind of standard we're going to reverse with the federal legislation. Is Texas will not get money unless they agree to go with, it's 1 to 20 is kind of the accepted standard, but it is 20 in a classroom but 2 adults. So you have a teacher and actually an aide who has his or her child development credential. I think, if you think of 20 children and 2 adults, and you think about first grade and children sitting at desks, that is unbelievable. But if you think about a room about this size with learning centers, with a child, a little housekeeping center, a great big block center, a reading center, a computer center, and different centers where the learning has been set up, and a creative center, and children are acting upon their environment, and they're making choices, and they're in charge of their own learning in some ways, and the teacher and the aide are there, increasing the vocabulary by having those conversations, and working in the block area to have pictures of suspension bridges, and how would you make a suspension bridge, and with these blocks. You will see that 20 is manageable, but it takes a really skilled teacher. So some states, New Jersey, for instance, has 2 adults with 18. But I think, it's the quality is critical, and if we don't get it right, we will always be looking back, and that's why we're having to go back and increase the child care standards, because we were so worried that these children were going to be left home with no care at all, and so we settled for low quality. And I don't think we can afford to do this, because every single child deserves the highest quality in this country that we can possibly get. So go forward, spread the word. I can be reached at the Department of Education. My email is libby.doggett@ed.gov, and I would love to hear from you. I'd love to make sure that you get connected with the great advocates here in Arkansas who have carried this message and gotten this state to a place we are all very, very proud of. Thank you very much.